I've done one or two little bits and pieces, sort of creeping in back to work. I did an Italian food festival back in August, which was really fantastic.
You've been doing this for so long. Do you get antsy when you haven't been on the road for a while?
Well, I mean, it's a bit beyond antsy, 2 years off. It's a bit beyond it. You start to think, you really do start to think that you don't know how to do it anymore, or indeed whether you ever did know how to do it, let alone get in front of an audience again, what they're going to make of it. It's, I thought, crikey, who's going to want to listen to this old grandpa music, after this? But it was fantastic, that little tour we did. The audiences were great. They showed up as well. I was warned that there might not be anybody there.
I don't think this is just pertains to touring, but just generally, something that I've noticed, just in terms of actually being able to leave my apartment, you build up a lot of momentum in life when you're used to doing something. And 2 years off of something, then the doubt really starts to creep in.
Yes, the doubt. Yes, indeed. But I'd sort of kept in its sort of match fit all through it. I wouldn't say I rehearsed every day, but I play the guitar every day. Well, I do anyway, it's sort of, that's not a chore. But I certainly started, I kept trying to write songs all the time with various amounts of success, and also to sort of keep my catalogue valid, as I saw it. So I didn't just look at a list of tunes, and have my heart sink, having to, wade through them again, So and that stood me in good stead, I think.
Are you generally somebody who keeps? I often use the term office hours when it comes to songwriting, of just carving out a certain number of hours during the day that you sit down and woodshed some songs?
No, I don't anymore. I got prodded into it a few years ago by my old friend John Hyatt, who told me that shortly after he moved to Nashville, he told me that he rented an office and got a couple of guitars in there, a few guitars and an amplifier and a keyboard, and every day he'd go in there, and if he didn't write a song, or preferably two, he'd be very, very disappointed. And I thought, oh my God, I couldn't do that, but I better have a go, So there was a place not far from where I live. It's a pub, actually, but it had this really fantastic kind of, like a community hall sort of attached to it. They have dances and there's a comedy club there and blah, 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 but it's got fantastic acoustics in there. It's only a little place. Sprung wooden dance floor, sort of arched ceiling, sort of 1920s, I suppose it was built. And I started renting it in the afternoon. I'd go down there and just sing. I didn't take any a little bit of guitar equipment, but I'd just sing into the room and see what came out. And I did actually write a few songs. I wouldn't say that there was one a day, That's sort of massively prolific, for me. But I certainly did knock out a few, but doing that way. But I don't know. They changed the arrangements down there. I didn't like going anymore, so I fell out of it.
It sounds like you found a special place, something that you haven't been able to recapture since then.
Yeah, I suppose I didn't think it never became a sort of a big deal for me. I found I could do it. I can actually write songs in my car, when I'm shopping, walking down the street. And in fact, I've always been quite a sort of loner in many ways. And so I haven't felt the need really to go somewhere and do it. I just did it because Hyatt, was sort of encouraged me to.
A little bit of peer pressure, it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. We did actually record an album in this place that I was just describing, and we thought, it's going to be fantastic. We'll do remote recording, it'll be much cheaper, and but in fact, when we started, and the acoustics would be great, and but when we started, we realised that it was very popular, this little community hall, and even though they rented it to us, in the evenings, they had the sort of Cub Scouts, the Keep Fit Club, the sort of political meetings and comedy, this and that. And so we had to set up and take down all the gear, at the end of every day. So in the end, the thing wound up costing the same as Bridge Over Troubled Waters, I think. It certainly wasn't economic, but it was a good record.
Have you gotten better at collaboration when it comes to the songwriting part of the process?
Well, I've had limited success with collaborating. Really, I generally, when I collaborate with someone, I always do what they suggest. I never argue with them. So I found, especially when I was producing records, that was a very good idea to do that, because very often, the other person's idea was much better than mine, and also in songwriting as well. But it's a process that I find, rightly or wrongly, I'm much happier when I do it as a sort of a solitary occupation. But I've written quite a few songs with other people. Yeah,
I've heard you describe your time as a producer, and it sounds like it was more organizational than anything. That you weren't necessarily calling the shots in the way that we might consider a producer now.
Yes, well, in my era, the record producer's role was much more as a sort of cheerleader, really, and a sort of music fan. Who would just remind the group of the influences they should be, sort of shepherd them into a sort of like a sheepdog, herding sheep into one of those corrals, like in the competition they have up in Scotland, Yes, father confessor, cheerleader, that sort of thing. And I barely used to touch the actual knobs, whereas now the producer, I don't really know what they do. It seems to like a much more of a technological job, record producing now, than what I used to do. In the olden days, anyone could be a record producer, really. If you had the front, as we say, you had the feeling that you'd get people going, then you could get a job as a record producer, and pretty well paid work it was too. So it was all kinds of chances.
It was well paid, and you worked on some of what I would consider the best albums of the era as essentially the in-house producer at Stiff. It sounds like a pretty good gig at the end of the day. Why didn't it stick ultimately?
Well, I got I never took to the seismic shift that came along in the 80s of the way records were made, when it went from analog to digital. And the initial music that came out of the digital studios sounded so hideous to me. Really, it sounded like nails being scraped down a blackboard. That it just sounded brittle and with no depth, and you couldn't get anything from the equipment. If you wanted more treble, you could turn a knob and up the treble came. But there wasn't the thing about the digital gear with all the valves and things in it, that as they gave the music some warmth and some feel, and you'd play into how the desk was dealing with the sound it was being given. And I found that, as I say, I didn't really twiddle knobs myself, but I was really good at talking to people who did know how to twiddle knobs, who were sitting next to me. I was very good at getting them to do what I heard. At any rate, whether I was right or wrong, that's another question. But I was young and confident, and was, my time had come. But when digital came along, I didn't stick with it. It seemed way more tiresome to me then, and the producer was supposed to sort of do it all as well, which I had no interest in learning how it all worked.
There continue to be people making more or less music in the styles that you're used to, but there just wasn't a place for you to be a producer in the modern industry of the early 80s.
No, there wasn't. I was really a sort of a gifted amateur, really, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And in those days, it didn't seem to be a big deal. You could say, well, it's coming along. We got some pretty. When you'd have to go into the record company, and they'd ask you how it was going. You said, well, pretty good. I think about halfway through it, but we had a bad day yesterday. No one was really into it, and we had a couple of bad songs, but I think we'll get over it today. And that used to be okay, And then suddenly, when the equipment got a little more fancy, suddenly they'd say, "What do you mean they didn't feel like it?" There's no such thing as they didn't feel like it. We need, they should always feel like it. And we know the equipment can deal with that. Anyway, all I'm trying to say is that I fell out of love with it.
I guess in the early 80s, you would have been the ripe old age of 31, 32, I think probably at that point. Was there a sense that the industry at large had passed you by and that that you might not be able to continue to make music the way you've been able to, or was it really just that specific part of the industry?
I think a bit of both, actually. I think I definitely round about the mid 80s, I really did feel, and also because I'd been a producer as well as a record maker and an appearer on TV.
And I should add, even though you were only in your early 30s at that point, you had been in the industry and you'd been making music for a while. Yes,
I suppose about 10 or 12 years, something like that. But I was very aware that my shtick had grown old, and the public had moved on as they do. And I was very, very aware of that and sensitive to it. And because I got fed up of it as well, I really thought, well, you've had your go. You've got to think of something else to do now. If you want to stay with this, don't just hang around, living off the, ever diminishing audience, who just want you to keep repeating the same thing. That was my idea. That was my idea of hell. That would be. So I did something about it. It took me a while, but I did something about it.
When you say think of something else, you mean a different angle to the music you're making, not getting out of music altogether.
Oh no! I considered it, but then I thought, well, what else are you going to do?
What other skills do I have?
Yeah, quite. Also, I thought. I thought, well, I've done pretty well. I've had a couple of hits myself, and I've written a few decent songs and for people, and produced a few good records for people, and troubled the charts a bit. But I really didn't think that I'd done something fantastic. Something really interesting and really, really good up to that point. And that's when I hit on this idea, which was to sort of prepare for getting older, really, in the business that didn't at that point give a toss for people who were in their 30s and had a go, and thank you very much, especially in the UK. They don't have a very long memory. Once you've had your go, that's it. And I guess that's perfectly fair enough, but I wanted to see if I could attract a new audience as well and hang on to the old ones. But I knew some of the old ones would drop away because I didn't want to do that loud Chuck Berry music any more, as much as I love Chuck Berry. I didn't want to do that sort of noisy stuff anymore. I wanted to do something that was going to work as I got older.
It's an interesting way of putting it that on paper you've done well, and certainly from the outside looking in, it appears that you've had a consistently successful career. But in that place and time when you were examining your successes and lack of successes up to that point, do you get a sense of what could have happened to have made you feel genuinely successful? Or is that something that, are you just wired to always have that feel a bit elusive?
Yeah, so that's a good question, really. I think that because of my sort of history, in the business, very early on, I had a sort of a brush with fame or what it could be like, which really scared the pants off me. I wasn't ready for it, and it could have been a really catastrophic, but I managed to sort of ride it out. But it really changed my mind about the blessing and the curse of fame and how you can control it. It's quite difficult, but I made up my mind that I was going to try and control how successful I was. I never wanted to be really, really successful because frankly, it's too much like hard work. It's really, really difficult to do that, and enormous pressure, and you've got to be nice to some really revolting people, which I didn't care for very much. I thought it'd be much more fun to be one of those slightly elusive people that where you can stick your head up when you've got something to alert the public to, and then duck down again and become anonymous. And that way you can, if you're clever, you can make a pretty good living out of the business and hang around with some nice people. It's just a much more agreeable process and agreeable existence, and so that's what I launched myself out onto trying to be able to do.
Having listened to some interviews that you did, it sounded like before anything else, before even the music, before the songwriting, you just wanted to be famous, right? That was really what was propelling you in the early days. This is a pretty dramatic shift. What was that moment? What was that brush with fame, and why did it have such a profound impact on you?
Well, it's a fantastic story, and it's beautifully told in a book that Will Birch wrote called No Sleep Till Canvey Island. It was essentially about the pub rock scene in London in the 1970s. But in order to tell the pub rock story, he had to tell the story of the band I was in, Brinsley Schwarz. And when we were one of thousands and thousands of bands in the UK going up and down the motorways, playing little clubs and colleges and things. There was endless gigs you could play back then. And we were one of thousands. And we've got sort of plucked out of obscurity by this management company who were fairly, well, one of them in particular was a crook.
In the music industry?
Yes. But they were very engaging people, and we were young and very keen and ambitious, and we got plucked out of obscurity here, and they decided to make us famous. And in order to do that, they managed to get us a gig at the Fillmore East, which in 1969 was about the coolest place in the world you could play. And we were very keen. We were a sort of pop group, really, but we wanted to get on the college scene. We didn't want to play in front of these spotty girls that we were playing for, prepubescent girls. It sounds like it might be fun to be screamed at, by these kids. But in fact, when we found that we were no oil paintings in our group, but even we, attracted this sort of attention. So Keffington Lodge definitely had to. Yeah, we wanted to get out of this and do something a little more highfalutin. And to play at the Fillmore East was, would be a dream come true. Anyway, we managed to get a gig there, opening for Quicksilver Messenger Service and Van Morrison. So that'll date it for. And Quicksilver Messenger Service were top of the bill, by the way.
This would have been just post them for Van Morrison.
I suppose it would, but certainly post Brown Eyed Girl. In fact, Moondance had just come out, so it was post Astral Weeks. That was the record he was promoting. And anyway, and in order to alert people to the fact that we were playing at the Fillmore East, this management company rented a 707 that was the jumbo jet of its day, from Aer Lingus, and filled it up with journalists to come and flew them over for the weekend to come and see us play. Now, nothing had ever been like this had ever been done. And they had journalists, not just from the music press, but from the straight press as well. And I mean that there was that in those days, I don't know if you remember this, Brian, but there was a straight world and a kind of hippie world, and they who sort of rubbed along okay. They didn't really understand each other, at least that's what we thought. But not only that, did they have music journalists and sort of news journalists on this plane, but they had people from trout fishermen, popular mechanics, every magazine, absolutely anyone who could write a column got a seat on this flight to come and write about this sort of crappy group. And we were pretty crappy, really. And then everything that could go wrong did go wrong. They were going to make a film of this quite recently of this incident, but really it was so zany and so crazy that I don't think they could make a satisfactory film of it. No, it would just seem too ridiculous, and it'd be too hard to explain this sort of pot smoking hippie world and the straight world that existed at that time, and which doesn't now. I mean, everyone's hip now, right? There aren't any straight people left.
That was enough to put you on a different path.
Sorry. Well, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. Well, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. But we'd spent the 2 or 3 months before we went off on this trip boasting and swanking around town, telling everyone, how
this was a dream come true for you.
Yeah, it was a dream come true. Yeah, and of course we were just totally not able to cope with doing a show like this. We just weren't good enough. We couldn't get admission to the States because some trouble we'd been in, and with the result that we arrived at the Fillmore. We were supposed to rehearse for a week at the Fillmore. It was going to be very leisurely, and on all this equipment that we'd ordered up for the show, which was all the stuff that our dream equipment, that we wished we had. But of course, we didn't know how to play it, make a sound with it, or anything like that. We were just young and stupid. And we arrived at the Fillmore about an hour before showtime, because that's when we could finally get a flight into New York. So everything went wrong. And with the result that all these journalists wrote that up. And it was for a young sort of ambitious kid, it was, or kids, it was incredibly embarrassing. And we realized we'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. But instead of breaking up, which we, should have done, we decided to stay together. I think it was because we'd been through this experience and we couldn't imagine how being out in the world with relating to people who hadn't been through it would be like. So we rented this house. We managed to get a couple of big paying gigs because of, because we were famous, but people would just want to come along and sort of throw stones at us or something like that. So we had a few big paying gigs, which financed us for a few months, and really we got in this house and we just started practicing and practicing and practicing, and till we did actually get pretty good. And we got rid of all the big amps and things like that we got little tiny amps, and we started playing away and listening to, and of course, because we lived in the same house, we started all listening to the same music. It was like going to some sort of weird seminary or something like that, some religious sort of retreat in a way, because we slowly got better and better. And in the strange way that the way it works over here in this country, if you make a big mistake like we did and are the laughing stock, after a while, I guess it's the same in the States, but after a while, suddenly it turns around, and the fact that you've been that laughing stock suddenly makes you sort of stronger, and people are rather start sticking up for you, And if also you're actually found to be pretty good after all, and not just a joke. It works even more for you in your favor. And along came this pub rock scene where the band started in London. It only really was a London phenomenon, really. They tried it in a few other cities, so it didn't really work. But in London, bands started playing in these pubs free. And there'd always been music in pubs, but they were really, it was like Irish traditional music or bands just doing the top 20, you know, that kind of thing, or crooners, you know, that sort of thing. But to have bands that actually wrote their own tunes and had a, you know, big repertoire. And we were very influenced by this American band who started it all off, Eggs Over Easy, and we sort of pinched their act, really. They wrote really great songs, but they also had a very, very unsnobby attitude to the covers that they did. They chose their covers really great. That was a brand new thing in the UK, doing some really obscure R&B tune, you know, and then a version of something that was number one in the charts that week, you know, like NRBQ did, I guess, you know, that sort of attitude to it. So we started doing this and built this reputation. Suddenly we were packing these places out, and people had forgotten about this, the fact that we were, you know, a laughing stock. And then slowly that went into the punk era. And that's when a voice said, "Cashier number 3, please," you know, and it was my turn. And I stepped forward, and these opportunities to Stiff Records and people asking me to produce their records and things.
Why is it that punk was your turn? I mean, I get the feeling that you're not a particularly big fan of most of punk, or, you know, most of punk that's come along since then. And two, obviously the music that you were playing at the time, Rockpile and those first few solo records, were faster than they are now, but you're decidedly not a punk act. Why did that fit for you? Why was that a good time for you to cash in that check?
Well, you're right. Yes, punk music really didn't interest me at all, really. The sort of mainstream thrashy, you know, white kids just flailing away, that's of no interest to me at all. I was too old, really. I'd been a mod, you know. I liked R&B and country and Western music, and you know, and that sort of thing, and trying to be good. You know, I wanted to actually be good,
play your instrument well.
But the whole Fillmore East debacle had made me extremely aware of how fickle the business could be, and how before I got into the music business, that was ridiculous idea of how it went, you know, it was completely wrong. So I found that I became an outsider. You know, that's what I wanted to be. It's how I positioned myself as well. And I enjoyed this. I enjoyed this little groove I'd got for myself. And I found that the punk rock scene really helped that, because I loved the sort of mayhem and the mischief that it was caused, even though the music didn't interest me very much. But the mayhem and the mischief, oh yes, that interested me a lot. Because it meant you could make up the rules, and if you were, and especially for that sort of, I don't know, it seemed like a long time. It wasn't. It was probably about 4 or 5 weeks, something. But there were for about 4 or 5 weeks when people who really wouldn't have given me the time of day were losing their job. I'm talking about big wheels in record companies and things like that, who wouldn't have given me the time of day. They were suddenly losing their jobs because they were out of touch. They couldn't, they didn't really know what was going on. And I'd fallen in by this time with some like-minded people, you know, and we started this record label, and all these things fell into place. We found, you know, back in those days, the music press in the UK, there was 4 or 5 music papers came out weekly, and they had huge circulation by today's standards. And we knew all the cool writers on these papers, and we used to go, as they did, to the same sort of 4 or 5 pubs, one nightclub. You know, there wasn't that many places to go in London really for to hang out. but we all used to hang out and mingle. And we found that we could, with Stiff Records, if we got these journalists on our side, we could inform the public weekly what we were up to. We didn't have to go through a press. They didn't have to go through a press department or anything to get any gossip. Or we could feed them gossip. It was a total. You scratch my back, we'll scratch yours. We had this massive network, and the fact that it was kind of under the table, not strictly playing by the rules, that made it even more exciting all round. And we were able to play this outlaw act, and be elusive. It was incredibly exciting because we were, for these 3 or 4 weeks, as I say, the way I always imagine is the monkeys were running the zoo for that time, and it was brilliant. But they soon got the zookeepers got back in charge again, pretty soon. But for those few weeks, it was fantastic.
Having been through the ringer at a young age and hearing you describe it, certainly musically and probably from the standpoint of maturity, you really weren't ready for that kind of exposure. Having been through that, are there any subsequent opportunities that you turned down because you didn't want to go through that kind of process again?
No, that's a really good question. I'm sure there were, Brian, but I can't remember what they might have been now. It all seemed, because sometimes you'd have a go at something which is a little out of your range,
your comfort zone.
Yeah, just to see if you could do it. Just to see if you could do it. So I can't honestly remember. But no, no, I'm afraid that is gone.
I had heard you specifically describing the process of not writing What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding, but coming to accept the way that people were interacting with the song, and that you said it was sort of a rare, mature thought that you had at the time, that almost people's interpretation of it doesn't really matter, and that you don't need to over explain it. And I get the sense that early on in your career, you valued maturity, especially when it comes to being a songwriter. And I think a lot of people are in that boat, but there's an irony of being in music and life generally, where you value maturity at a young age, and then as you get older, you begin to flee it. That's what the music business has been like around you. And it sounds like certainly you aspired to maturity early on, but you learned the lesson of not trying to flee it.
Yes, or to learn how to do it. It's I suppose it's like I'm thinking of who's the painter who just paints blocks of color.
Is it Rothko?
Yeah, well, it's certainly Rothko. Yes. I'm thinking of someone who's a bit more sort of blocks of color now.
Abstractions.
Yes, abstract. But you think, man, I could do that. Who couldn't? But that Rothko probably draw a hand, can draw the muscles of the body, before you can start doing blocks of color,
But Picasso is the great example of that, right? I mean, you see his really kind of hyper-realistic early work.
Exactly. And I suppose, I'm not comparing myself to these people, of course, but I mean that if you learn the sort of tricks of show business, the how to work a room, how to chat up an audience, all those sort of old pro tricks, then you can use it the way you want to use it. That I suppose that was, if that's where as I understand what you mean by maturity, that I did want to do that. I wanted to be sort of on the surface a kind of old school entertainer, but be a bit subversive, be able to sort of infiltrate and double cross, as they used to say. That always interested me. Wasn't anything to be embarrassed by or ashamed of. I sort of enjoyed that, the learning process.
There's a famous Nick Kent quote about you. I think, what is it? The king of subversive pop, to describe your earlier work. And hearing you describe it now, it's something that it sounds like, at least maybe in hindsight are very cognizant of and are very conscious of. When you come out, it's older now, it just celebrated its 20th anniversary, but when you come out with an album like The Convincer, for example, which is a mature record, certainly is on the face of it, what are those subversions in there? What are you doing to kind of buck some of these ideas?
Well, you make a good point, really, because when I was younger, that subversive pop thing was in a way an excuse for not having to really make a hit record. If you just say, "Oh, I could do that," but in fact, this is I choose to do this subversive version.
It wouldn't have been punk to have a big hit record.
No, I guess not. No, but yeah, it was all of the time. I just did what I could at the time, but. When you get a bit older, you think, well, wait a minute. The real goal here is to write some songs that people actually really want to hear, not just music journalists, and people in the business, or your pals, all sniggering in the toilets, and actually do some, do some proper songs, write some proper songs that people really want to listen to. That's actually really subversive.
At what point do you feel that you started, if you feel like you have written proper songs, when did that really start happening for you?
Well, I suppose when I had this sort of realization in the 80s, that's when and also when I started, a very big thing for me was meeting and playing with Ry Cooder, who was quite different from how I thought he was going to be. I was a real fan of his and still am, God bless him. But he was, I learned so much from him of things that I really wanted to know about. That I didn't necessarily think before I met him. I didn't think that I thought I might even know more than he did about it. But it had all my thought processes had already occurred to Ry, of figuring out how to marry all this stuff up and how pop relate. He's a consummate folk musician, really, but he loves pop music as well, and is really aware of how pop songs are put together. And I found that when I met him, it was a real eye opener for me, and I learned a lot from him.
Having heard you describe the songwriting process, it sounds like that there is always this, and certainly this isn't specific to you, but that there is a tension between wanting to overcomplicate things and wanting to write the simplest song possible. Do you feel that at this point in your career that you've struck the right balance?
Well, I think I get closer to it the older you get. I mean, Noel Coward said, the trouble about getting older is what did he say? No sooner are you on than you're off. I mean, I think he was talking about the stage, but
it applies to life too.
Yes, it does. That you do get closer and closer to it, but never. It's always slightly out of reach. At least to me, it is. But I think that it is subversive to write very simple, direct songs. There's a joy to that. I do write songs with more than 3 chords in them, but a really direct, simple thought, and attractively presented to me is about 3 minutes long. To me is absolutely ideal. Still, there's just something gorgeous about that idea, and I still aspire to it. And I've written. I think I've written. I wouldn't like to quantify it, but a lot of my best songs in later life, definitely. And I wrote some good ones when I was a kid too, but I didn't really know about songwriting. That's when I listened back to stuff that I did when I was younger, which I thought was pretty good. I'd think, oh man, why did you do that? You didn't have to do that bit, that silly bit, in there. And oh Lord, you've done it again, later on in the song, even worse. But those sort of things, the craft of it, I do think of myself much more of it as a sort of craftsman, really, than a sort of artist. I make artistic decisions, but I don't really think of myself as an artist, with explaining my pain, to my rapt audience. I think of myself much more as a sort of a Tin Pan Alley guy, really. And I don't think that's a shameful not lot but position.
I think part of maturing as an artist, or just somebody who puts things out into the world, I mean, this is something I've certainly thought about myself, is learning to accept the things that people like in your own work on their own terms, of not begrudging people for not liking the right songs or liking the right songs for the wrong reasons. I think about this in the context of So It Goes was the first song that I heard of yours that really, I heard it on some compilation somewhere, and I was hooked. I know that it's a song that you at points in your career have not felt is your best song. And I know that it sounds like maybe a little bit of Steely Dan kind of snuck in there and influenced it as well. But at least in the footage that I've seen, it's also the song that is opening up the Straightjackets tour that you just did. So, you've learned to, I don't know if re-embrace it is the right word, but at very least it's back in the repertoire.
Yes, it's a great little tune I've suddenly discovered. Well, I had to be reminded by members of Lost Straightjackets that it might actually be quite a good tune for us to do, because so many people know it, and it people really like it. And there's few things more pleasurable than standing on a stage and singing a tune that you can tell people are really pleased to hear. There are a few of those, I think, that you when you come up against them when you're older, that you see them in a different light, and figure out a way of being able to do them that doesn't feel like you're just rehashing something ancient.
Yeah, well, that gets back to the Chuck Berry comment of earlier. You couldn't and you wouldn't want to do it in exactly the way that you did it on that first record.
Yeah, quite. I haven't got such a high voice either.
I had heard you in an interview describe part of what has kept bringing you back to the songwriting process is, and I think at the time you put it, that you wanted to write, I think it was a half dozen great songs. And obviously, as you said earlier, you don't really like quantifying it. You are obviously, if not one of your greatest critics, but where are you at in that quest? Do you feel like you've gotten to 6, or are you close?
Yeah, I think I've written a few good ones. I mean, I suppose I think of my sort of catalogue. I don't know how many songs I've written. I really don't. I mean, it's hundreds. It is hundreds, and those are the ones that have been published. But there's way more the ones that just have fallen by the wayside and things like that. But I think probably it's all in the ear of the beholder, of course. But I think that it's like all pop music. I would think my catalogue is like all pop music, which I would think is kind of 85% rubbish or forgettable, should we say? Because as I say, it's in the ear of the beholder.
15% is still a pretty good. That's still a pretty good rate, all things considered.
Yes. Well, I would think 10% is pretty good, on a scale of 1 to 10, and I think 5% is well, it's probably a bit generous. I would think maybe 3% is very good, and 2% is as good as anybody's stuff. I would think as good as anybody's stuff. But the rest of it, I think, is you've got to write 12 tunes really to get anything that's any good. I think is the average. That
2%. At what point in the process do you realize that it's part of the 2%?
That's a teaser. Yes, I think it's when you encounter them again, when you're thinking, well, let me have a look through the catalogue and see what we've got. If I've missed something, and you pick the guitar up and you start playing the song, but you don't do it in the way you've done it. You did it on record because I just haven't listened to the record. I don't sit around at home like most people listening to my own record. But you'll start playing it and maybe not even half remember it really, but you'll start playing it and going through the lyric, and you'll start stripping not whole lines out, but certainly extra words and the ands and buts and so's, which you do put all that stuff into, prop it all up when you're writing the song, to get the lyric all sitting on the melody. But after a few years, you can't remember all that. You just want to tell the story. So all that stuff falls away. But you've got all this, hopefully, this sort of maturity, and you can suddenly find you can tell the story in a much more convincing way. You think, man, this is actually a pretty good tune. Yes, please, I'll have this. And so I hope that, long may that process happen. And then every so often you write a new one. But I'm very critical about, I'm not as prolific as I have been anymore. And I'm much more impatient with things. When I come up with things that I've heard myself do before, I get impatient with them. I'm always trying to sort of surprise myself and think, man, who wrote that? Not you.
Do you still surprise yourself?
Yeah, from time to time. Yeah, I do. Actually, thank goodness. Yeah, I do. It's a strange way of making a living.